Welcome to the Growth Network, the platform made to connect people dedicated to growing and becoming the version of yourself that you're born to become. I'm sat today with Professor Cordell Schultens. That's your last name, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Schultens, yes. But I've had the privilege of being in your class, psychology.
And I had the privilege of you being one of my students too.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But it's a strange one because you teach psychology of moral and spiritual development. It's a long title.
Right. I didn't make it up. It was another professor designed the course, and then it was handed off to me.
Right. And then, so how did you end up being how did you end up being a professor of moral and spiritual development?
Yeah. Well, I didn't start being a professor at a university to begin with. My original, well, way back at the very beginning, I was simply teaching at a middle school. And I was teaching at a private middle school and found out that it was that private school, along with a lot of other private schools, were experiencing a lot of legal challenges. And I started going to conferences, and the main presenters at the conferences were lawyers. So I got more and more interested in the law and the laws that applied to education, especially private education, things like that. And so it prompted me to consider leaving my position as a teacher, going back to school, and then eventually on to law school, hoping to become a lawyer that would do work primarily in the area of education law. That didn't turn out according to my plan. I ended up doing a wide variety of other things, and then realizing that the practice of law was not my best fit for me. And ended up.
How did you end up making that decision? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go right ahead.
How did you end up making that decision? Like, what was the thought process there?
So what happened was I ended up working for one of the largest firms here in St. Louis and doing a lot of work for very large corporations, very wealthy people, and realized that I ended up sort of discovering after about 8-9 years that what I'd really been doing was simply playing a lot of very sophisticated games using law and playing a lot of games to allow very wealthy people to keep their money when in fact they actually owed it to other people that had done work for them. And so one particular case I was working on sort of opened my eyes to that. And a partner came in. I ended up winning the case when I probably shouldn't have, because I sort of was able to tell a convincing story to a jury by being very fast and loose with the facts. And I ended up winning.
Being convincing.
I was, trying to do what a lawyer's supposed to do, represent your client. But when I ended up winning that case, and my supervising partner came to my office a few days later and said, Cordell, when you first started working here, I didn't think you were going to fit in. And by that he meant, since I was sort of known for being a bit more, straight down the line and not willing to fudge on ethical questions and things like that. He said, I didn't think you were going to fit in, but now I know you're going to fit in. And that sort of was like almost an arrow that pierced my heart, and thought, wow, what am I doing? And prompted me to reevaluate, why I was doing what I was doing in the practice of law. I wasn't doing what I had originally hoped to do, and then realized that I really needed to make a change. And so I did. And I first went into serving churches in a pastoral ministry. And then that led me back to teaching, because the elders of the church I was serving said, you're much better suited to be a teacher. And actually, that's what led me back in 1995 to come here to what was then Missouri Baptist College and start teaching business law. So the law, my legal background, gave me the opportunity to start teaching. and then that started me on my path to formation as a Christian, as a professor in here at Missouri Baptist, and then to other universities also.
It's interesting how a compliment, an intended compliment, was taken as an insult and
Right.
led to such a drastic change in direction and a drastic
Right.
change in your life.
It did.
That's a really interesting one.
Mm.
I don't know. It's really strange just thinking about how that happened.
Yeah.
But and then business law as well. It is strange because you do think about, like, why did you not want to fit in? What was so bad about? I mean, you hear the typical about, like, lawyers like, twist the truth and this, that, and the other, and you hear the things from the outside, but
Right.
you were in it. So like, what was it you didn't want to fit in?
Yeah. Well, what I ended up doing was I had an extremely wealthy client who owned a lot of businesses, and the instructions I was given by my client was, well, I don't care about the business. The jury can return a verdict. The business owes money. Yes, that's fine. Go ahead and basically throw in the towel for the corporation. And the reason he said that was because, unbeknownst to me, he had already drained that business of all of its assets. So a judgment against the corporation was going to be meaningless to him. This is what happens when you're a young lawyer working for a big law firm, and many other lawyers in your firm are doing the other legal work for the client, and you're just given a singular task of representing the business in this particular lawsuit. So they basically tell me, go ahead, you can throw in the towel on the corporation, but there was also a claim against the individual 100% shareholder owner, this very wealthy businessman.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a theory in law that says that if you run a business, even though it's a corporation technically,
Mm-hmm.
if you run it basically as your business, you make all the decisions. You may have a board of directors, but that board of directors is really only there in show. You're still controlling everything, making all the business decisions day to day, which is what in fact was happening. Then anyone who is suing the corporation for a debt, money that corporation owes its vendors, can also sue the 100% shareholder,
Mm-hmm.
the owner of the corporation, and say, this corporation is just a veil to your personal interest, and you ought to personally be liable. You ought to personally be legally responsible for the debts of this corporation. Well, they didn't want that. They wanted me to do everything I could to convince the jury that there was a legitimate business reason for this corporation, and that the owner, the 100% shareholder, was not running it as his alter ego. That's the legal terminology.
Mm-hmm.
I was successful in that claim because that's where I told the jury I used the facts that were available to me, but created a rationale which was never in the mind of my client. But I created that story, I created that rationale for the jury to lead the jury to believe, oh, well, there was a legitimate business reason for this company, and we should not hold the individual 100% shareholder legally responsible. We will not pierce the veil and put the debt on the individual. We'll still acknowledge that it's a corporate business debt. Mm-hmm. I was successful in accomplishing that, but in order to do that, I had to create a rationale in the minds of the jury, which in fact never really existed. Right. So, the short way to say that is I lied.
Right.
And by creating this fabricated fantasy in the minds of the jury, I was able to protect my client. And of course, that's what my supervising partner wanted me to do.
Right.
Make the client happy.
Right.
But then I realized I have just compromised my own personal integrity
Yeah.
by doing this, playing fast and loose with the facts. And that's what convinced me that I was definitely had not stayed on the path that I thought I was going to be on,
Mhm.
serving people through the practice of law. Now I was serving my own interests. I was putting my own interest and ambition
Mhm.
ahead of what I had originally been called to do.
And so was it when you were given that compliment that was really an insult?
That,
Was it that moment that you realized you wanted to work in ethics and
no,
law
not
or
at that particular moment, but it was the beginning of a reevaluation of what am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to continue in the full-time practice of law? If I was to do that, what sort of law would I be comfortable practicing? And I did. I went to work for a very small firm of 2 or 3 lawyers for about a year, and I practiced in a variety of different areas, but still had no uh, personal, sense of, yeah, this is what I should devote the rest of my life to.
fulfillment?
And at the same time, I was also helping at a small startup church,
Mhm.
and I was teaching and preaching, and people were coming to me and saying, what you're saying is meaningful. It's helpful to me. You ought to do this more often.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, maybe I should use the talents and abilities that I've been entrusted with, not to continue in the full-time practice of law, but maybe in an area of either church ministry or teaching in general.
Mhm.
And eventually that's what led me to apply to become a professor here.
Mhm.
I worked part-time for 5 years here and then was eventually invited to join the full-time faculty.
And so how did you go from starting out in business law to then being to working in like teaching ethics and
Well,
spirituality?
um, I had my law degree, but when I left the law practice and started serving churches, I also wanted to strengthen my background in theology and understanding the Bible. So I went to seminary, and right down the road here at Covenant Seminary here in St. Louis.
Mhm.
And one of my best professors at seminary was Dr. David Jones, and he taught the ethics course there. And it was during my time in his courses that I started to see there's an intersection between my legal background, education and training and experience, and what I want to do with my teaching and academic work. And that's what eventually led me. I went from business law to business ethics, and then a variety of law related courses. And the particular course that we were studying together, that was when I was asked to take over
Mhm.
as a member of the faculty here, because I had a background in both theology and my background in the social sciences and in
I
law
see.
in particular.
I see. So it was because okay, that makes
It
perfect
was more
sense.
by invitation. I didn't
Right.
choose it.
Right.
It wasn't something I chose. And a lot of things in my life have come that way. I
Right.
haven't specifically made a plan.
Right.
It's been more by, I just happened to be along the path and someone said, hey, you might be able to help us
Right.
do this.
I do think it is a perfect fit for you though, because the way you describe, like, I mean, we spoke about a lot of authors in the class,
Hmm.
and later on in the episode, I want to talk about a couple of them specifically.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as to who are your favorites that we mentioned within the class.
Yeah. I would have to say that Henri Nouwen is an author that has been very formative in my own life. Yeah, reading his works and not only his ideas as expressed in his books, but also seeing his life as a professor and then leaving a very prestigious position as a professor in an Ivy League university, and then going and serving in a community of adult mentally challenged individuals as a caretaker and as a pastor chaplain. That life decision on his part sort of embodying the things that he was teaching, that was very significant to me. And then the other author that I think I mentioned in class was most formative in my experience along the way was the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Now, we didn't read anything
I don't remember
specific.
that. I don't
Yeah,
remember
we
that.
didn't read anything specifically, but I shared a couple of quotes at the beginning of class
Mhm.
from Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was a German pastor and professor, and back in the 1930s and 40s,
Mhm.
and he became one of the leaders of what was called the Confessing Church, the church that withdrew from the formal established German church and was the center of the resistance against Adolf Hitler and the Nazis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mm.
So I personally had like my biggest attraction to like C.S. Lewis.
Oh, yes,
Like
definitely.
he's what I did. So we had to do a presentation
Right.
in the class, and for the majority of my presentation, like we were supposed to compare ideas, and I
Right.
chose Victor A. Copeland and C.S. Lewis,
Yes.
and I spent the majority of the time just talking about C.S. Lewis, just because I found his ideas so intriguing.
Yeah.
And I was actually wondering, like, could I give a short summary just to like, just so they
Sure.
can have an idea of what we're
Excellent.
talking about? And I was
No.
actually hoping to get your
Lewis again. If I had to list my top five, he would be in my top five.
right.
Yeah.
He's a really interesting one. That
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna kind of break it down like point by point, and then kind
Sure.
of get your thoughts as we go, if that's okay.
Sure. That's great.
But I mean, the first thing about the presentation was he said spiritual formation is not an option, but it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I made the point within my presentation that it was like not necessarily a choice, but it's within all of our choices.
Right.
And it's just like a continuous process.
Exactly.
And it's like we can't. It's something. It's not like our spiritual formation is not something that we can avoid. Um, so I mean, first things first. Like, what's your kind of thoughts behind that?
No, I think your insight is exactly correct. Every choice we make is a part of what is forming us, and every encounter, every person that we engage, every experience of life that we're involved with, down to this very moment here and now, is a part of what's being an influence upon us, continuing to form us, because that formation is an ongoing process. It's not something that has necessarily a point where we're done.
Right.
We're always being formed. We're always being shaped. And so that each choice that we do make day by day uh, is a part of those experiences that continue to form us.
Mhm.
And Lewis, I think, makes the point of our choices uh, have the impact on ourselves individually of either drawing us closer to God or taking us farther away from Him. And likewise, our encounters with other people, every encounter that we have with another person would have the influence, the effect of either helping to draw that person closer to a relationship with God or maybe, in fact, pushing them farther away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny. The last episode I had on here, we had a Keon Batchman, one of my teammates at the
Yeah.
moment, and he said that he doesn't like to be around people when he's like, whenever I'm in a bad mood, whenever I feel that my energy is bad, I don't like to be around people because I feel like I don't want to bring their energy levels down to mine. I want to be the type of person to bring someone up to my level, and I want to be the energy giver, not the energy vampire.
Yes.
He didn't use the terminology of energy vampire, but
Right.
I've heard that before, and you kind of get what I mean. It's like you don't want to suck the life out of people. You want to just give people. You want to be providing, and
Right.
I think C.S. Lewis kind of alludes to that a little bit. He also talks about how we become like every choice makes us more heavenly and more hellish beings.
Right.
And he says every sin that we commit is destroying our spirituality. He uses the word destroying.
Right.
So I was just kind of curious, like what you thought about like the wording between like heavenly and hellish beings, and then like and then the choice of like destroying, because it sounds very violent. It paints the image of like, you know, an actual destruction of our spirituality. But whereas like the creation of a spirituality he doesn't necessarily create like have any wording that the positive imaging behind creating our spirituality
Right.
isn't necessarily as pleasant as the word destroying is negative.
Right.
So I just kind of
Right. Doesn't seem to balance out.
exactly. So I
Right.
was just kind of hoping to get your thoughts on the heavenly and hellish and destroying.
I think I would tend to agree, though, with Lewis, because by our nature, we tend to be resistant and rebelling against what we're intended, or what I should say, God intends us to be. God wants us to be in an ongoing awareness that we live and breathe in His presence, and that He gives us life and the ability to be that encourager, supporter of others, where we can contribute to others' well-being and joy. That's what we're designed to do. That's what, as a full human being, that's what we're designed to do. But when we live our lives pursuing our own selfish interests, that I want my needs to be met first, and I think about myself first, and making sure that I'm being recognized, making sure that I'm being properly compensated, or however you might phrase that. That detracts from, and Lewis would use the word, when we pursue those things that are opposed to God's plan and purpose for us, a selfish ambition, a selfish, self-gratifying, self-satisfying, give me what I want here and now for me, that is destructive of the more elegant, the more beautiful, the more heavenly influence we could have on others. I think of it more, he talks about creatures, heavenly creature, hellish creature.
Right.
I almost think of like angels and demons or something like that. Mm-hmm. But that imagery, I think, is maybe a little outdated. I think it's more, God designs us as sort of like masterpieces of His artwork. And when we allow Him to design and shape and mold, then we become more and more that expression of His masterpiece. But when we go our own way, when we pursue our own selfish interests, that's detracting, that's harming, that's maybe putting the less the harmful strokes, whether it's to a sculpture. You can take a chisel and hammer and make a beautiful structure, or you can just take the hammer mm-hmm. and destroy the marble. Mm-hmm. So God has, His purposes for even the pain in our life to bring about a more beautiful, a more, in Lewis's terms, heavenly expression. But when we allow it to simply be, when we sort of pursue our own selfish interest, then it becomes more of a hammer, just destroying that lovely work of art that could otherwise have been. It doesn't mean it can't be repaired. Mm-hmm. He's a master artist. He can repair those things that we sometimes, when we lose it, and the hammer blows start having significant impacts on our own life and on the lives of others. That's harmful. But that's what God's grace and forgiveness is all about. That's where the restoration can come, and where the renewal can come, and we can be more and more reformed back into God's purpose and plan, that shape that He had designed for us.
Right. And I think you use the imagery of like the chisel and the hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting because within spirituality, like using the example of the chisel and the hammer, it's like you can only chisel away so much. You can't necessarily, like, what you've chiseled away, you can't just put it back.
Right.
Whereas within spirituality, you can do that.
Right.
It's like you can't. There is like an undo button almost.
There is a restoration. There's a means of restoration. It goes beyond us.
Hmm.
We can't do it on our own.
Exactly.
But that's the grace of God through Christ that can bring about that restoration, that reconciliation.
I think C.S. Lewis kind of almost alludes to that with the idea of moral compound interest as
Yes.
well. He's
Uh-huh.
like, we come out the gates. It's like I like this image of like we come out the gates, and because we're flawed human beings, we come out the gates, and everything is just compound, going down, down, down. We're going down, down, down at a faster and faster rate,
Right.
and eventually, at some point, hopefully, we start to figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's when we start to be able to redeem ourselves, and in the idea that the God the God has for us,
Right. Right.
and it's like that as we eventually start to figure out who we are and we start to live in line with that idea of what he has for us,
Right.
then that's how we can kind of put the pieces back on the statue that we've already chiseled away that we
Right.
wouldn't be able to do in the physical world.
Well, and become more aware of how He is working, and we can believe, we can have faith. Okay, Lord, I know you've started a good work. You're going to continue that good work. You'll finish your masterpiece, and I can believe that every day of my life. And I can acknowledge, Lord, I need you to continue your work, continue to shape me and form me today, restore me, along the way.
He also speaks a bit about. I mean, do you have anything else you want to say about the moral compound interest before we move on?
Well, I think Lewis makes an excellent point there by saying we have to understand how significant our rebellion is. Our natural course is to go away from God's purpose and plan. That's our natural inclination. But He can restore us back to that proper path and enable us to get onto that right path. But if we continue down a path of rebellion, it's like that snowballing effect. It gets worse and worse and worse. And my life I can testify to that. When I was outside of going my own way, pursuing my own interest, things just got worse and worse and worse. It was like spending money, spend easier to spend more money and get into bigger debt, but then the debt bears interest and it compounds. And while my original debt may have only been, $10,000, over a very short amount of time, that debt can double because of the compounding. And so that type of imagery is the same way. When we continue on that path of pursuing our own selfish interest, opposed to, in rebellion against God's purpose, then things, the consequences enlarge and grow in exponential form.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely
Yeah.
agree. I did have some thoughts about moral compound interest because it kind of seemed to me that if the compound interest works in both ways, then there's essentially no compound interest.
Mm-hmm.
Does that kind of make sense?
No, it does. Yes.
Because it's like if it's going to go down 1 and then down 2 and then down 4, and then it's like if it's doing that this way and it's doing the exact same thing the other way, why is it not just down 1, then down another one, down another, and then back and then the opposite the same way?
Right.
So it's like, what effect does it really have if it is compound interest or not? So I kind of had the idea about it. Do you have anything to kind of add to that? Because I had a question about that. I don't know if you have an idea that might make some sense of it.
Well, yeah, I don't know that I thought it through carefully enough to be able to sort that out, but I think the overall point is the longer we stay on a path of rejection, a path of our own selfish interest, the deeper and darker it's going to get. I mean, in my own life experiences, I got to the point where I literally had a dark night of the soul. I remember vividly going to my law office, and I'd been on this path of seeking my own selfish interest for quite some time. And I literally drove my car into the garage underneath my office building, and I felt as if I was being swallowed by darkness. I mean, that was a very vivid, it's still to this day a very vivid memory I have. And I think that's sort of like the experience of that moral compounding of the path of self-interest, self-ambition, self-destruction, and how it can just swallow you up,
Right.
and how you realize that it has to be that you're at a point where you can't lift yourself out of that, but there is one, and that's why Christ, the reality of Christ's incarnation, the fact that in Christianity we have a God who became a man, which is totally, unique. You're the God man, and experienced life, and is the one who overcame in his life, and now is enabling us by the life he gives us to be restored and to come back to that path and to pursue where God wants us to be. He enables that. So that's the resolution that I understand, and that's the resolution that I've experienced, and by His grace continue, but only by His grace continue
Right.
to experience, not because of anything I'm doing or able to generate.
It's funny you mentioned that. Like, I definitely understand the Dark Knight. I suffered with depression for several years. From when I was 6 to 18. I've spoken about it on the podcast before, so I'm not going to talk about it for too long. I'll speak about my Dark Knight in a second, but I remember I will say that the Dark Knight does kind of come out of nowhere. And that's kind of why I do believe that the moral compound interest is something that is true, though I don't necessarily understand because of the question that I just asked.
Right.
Because it's something that it's something that speeds up. And like as you continue to spiral in these thoughts, and as you continue to surround yourself with these ideologies and these people who are not meant for you, then you just continue to feel worse at a faster and faster rate until eventually it's like, how did I even get like this?
Right.
And you don't even know where it came from. And for me, it was my Dark Knight was actually during my freshman year of college. I'm now a senior, and I was in Colorado at Division II. I actually spoke about it briefly. I think it was 2-3 episodes ago with Ricky Branch. Have you met Ricky Branch?
I have not.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
Really great guy. If you ever get a chance, light-skinned guy, big afro. He used to be on the football team.
Oh, wow.
But now he's around campus. But again,
Cool.
Awesome guy. If you get a chance to speak to him,
Excellent.
He's a great guy.
Sure.
But yeah, I was talking about it a little bit with him. And it's like, for me, it was during my freshman year, I got to the highest point in terms of people looking in from the outside. In terms of people would look at me and like, now, like, since my freshman year, since then I've played at JUCO and NAIA, which from the outside isn't as high as Division II. But I'm more proud of myself now I'm more proud of the person I am now than the person I was back then. But from the outside, people would be looking at me and be like, even now, people would look at me and say that was his best year.
Right.
Even though I didn't play on the basketball court, I was on the best team. I had the best GPA in terms of when I've had across my lifetime. It was the most successful on the outside, but it's when I felt the loneliest. It's when I felt the lowest. It's when I felt the most. It was also the COVID year, so it's when like all those accomplishments were all here, but I had no one to share it with. And
right.
Like I said, I spoke about this all before the podcast, so I'm not going to get too much into it, and you kind of get my point.
Sure.
But it's interesting to think just how, as you spiral, and that Dark Night comes, and then that freshman year, and I remember there was one specific night where I was suicidal, and I was outside, and I went out, and I used to always go on these late night walks to try and. I told myself I was clearing my head, when really and truly it was more. So it was so that I could continue to feed myself these negative thoughts. And it was like, oh yeah, this is help. I was telling myself, oh, this is helping me. This is how I cope. When really and truly, it was just my way of feeding it and making it worse.
Wow.
And I didn't even realize it until last year, like 2 years later. And there was one. So again, I come back to the point of I was out on this ledge this one night, and I was just thinking I'm gonna jump. And then my best friend just called me out of nowhere. It's 3 a.m. I call my best friend once a week, once maybe twice a week.
Yeah.
and she just called me out the blue 3 a.m.
Wow.
And she's just like, "Hi, I just got the feeling that I had to call you."
Wow.
She's like, "Are you all right?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"If you'd called me 5 minutes later, there might have been no one to pick up this call."
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so it's just like that's kind of when I really started to think about, like, it was really that moment when I really started to think about coincidences. Are they coincidences?
Mm-hmm.
Is there actually a plan?
Right.
And then I started to think about, like, if there was a plan, why did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
why am I being kept here? And then I was
Right.
like, and then I started to think about, okay, well, now what is like, it wasn't the first time that I tried or thought about it, but it was the
Mm-hmm.
first time that I was like, it was the closest I'd come, I feel
Right.
like. And
Right.
it was a time where I was like, okay, now I can really bounce back from this. And I got the bow and arrow tattoo that literally a month or two after that,
Wow.
because it's like, as you pull back the string,
Yeah.
and it's like, then you let go and it takes off. And it's like, it has to get worse before it gets better.
Right.
And it's like, the harder you pull back, the further it takes off.
Exactly.
And the harder it takes off.
Right.
And so I just had this image, and eventually when I ended up I hadn't got over it yet, that mindset, but I'd committed myself to the fact that I was going to get over it.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and you knew that there were others.
Uh-huh.
You know, because you thought you were out there all by yourself.
Right.
But in fact you weren't. There were others who were thinking of you, and there's someone, your best friend, who's even reaching out to you at that very moment. That's the reality of others in our life, and how vital our understanding and our awareness of our need for that, and then likewise, correspondingly, how we need to be engaged in the lives of others too. Others need you.
Right.
Yeah, cool. That is very powerful.
And it's actually why it's really because of that, and because of several other events like that in my life, that I decided to even call this podcast the Growth Network.
Yes.
Because I feel like those are the two most important things as human beings. There's the growth and the continual dedication to trying to become better, and not just being satisfied with where you're at, but then also the understanding of, we are social beings, and we can't do that alone.
Right.
And I say this at the end of every episode, so to the point where people probably tune me out, or people probably just don't even listen or get to that point. But I always say, your growth is limited when you're alone. Yeah. And then I provide my socials and whatnot, and you'll see at the end. But it's the same thing, where it's like, your growth is limited when you're alone. You can only do so much by yourself.
Right.
And I've used this example with talking to friends before, where it's I like to think that when you're trying to learn, and when you're trying to pick each other's brains, with anyone, a friend, whatever, it's whenever you're having a meaningful conversation with someone, it's not like 1 + 1 = 2. It's because you're going back and forth, and you're both helping each other. You're both kind of expanding each other's ideas. So at the end, it might be 1 + 1 = 2, but then it's multiple times throughout that conversation. So at the end of the day, it's 1 + 1 = 5.
Exactly.
And now you've got this result, and it's like we talked about spiraling before in the negative direction. It's the other way.
Yeah, and now those spirals are getting larger and larger and larger as you're going up.
Right.
Too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent.
But yeah, no.
Yeah.
You have anything you want to add to that before I?
No, that's wonderful. That's amazing. You're exactly right on point. That's couldn't have said it better.
Well, thanks. But what's your opinion on? I mean, have you ever heard of C.S. Lewis's idea that we crave a heavenly grandfather as opposed to a heavenly father?
That I had not. I had not read that. I've read a number of C.S. Lewis's works, but I have not encountered that. Was not familiar with that before.
So he's actually. I came across something actually just by accident this week. And it was actually right after I saw this video that I was reminded that I had spoken to you about bringing you on the podcast, and I was like, yes, I just saw this. I told him I was going to bring him on the podcast. This is perfect. It was actually this.
Okay.
It was actually seeing this that sparked me to remind me to have you on here.
Interesting. Okay.
because I was curious what you thought about this. But he basically, C.S. Lewis had the idea. I didn't write down the whole quote, but I wrote down the majority. These are mostly the words that he used. He said, we crave a heavenly grandfather, and he says a senile benevolence who, quote, like to see young people enjoying themselves, and whose plan for the universe was that each day it could be said a good time was had by all. And he said that's what we crave from God.
Okay.
And he says we hope that we don't have the heavenly Father figure whose authority we have to follow,
Right.
and we have to do what he says. And
Sure.
and I think the reality is we have both.
Well,
that's my opinion.
Okay. No, I see that. I now understand what he's getting at. As you described that to me, our natural human inclination is we'd love to have a heavenly grandfather, just as much as my grandson Hunter likes to be with me as opposed to his dad.
Right.
Because his dad's going to be more strict, is going to have higher expectations. Right. It's that old adage, what father isn't excited to see the first step his son takes, but no father would be satisfied unless his son is a full-grown man capable of standing and walking and running, in every way. The difference between being pleased and being satisfied, there's the challenge of the father. But grandfathers are, I want to, I love every moment, and I want to just pour out everything that I can. If Hunter wants sausage links at 4:00 in the afternoon, I make him sausage links at 4:00 in the afternoon. Whatever he wants, I want him to be happy. I want him to enjoy his time with me. Yeah, we would love to have a heavenly grandfather rather than to know that our heavenly Father wants us to grow and mature and become stronger and capable of fulfilling our purpose and serving him and serving others, standing on our own in order to bear the burdens of others, living beyond ourselves. Heavenly grandfathers just coddle us, but our heavenly Father is the one who's going to be helping to shape and mold us into that further growth and development. Yeah.
I'm going to expand on the idea that we have both, and then I'm going to and then I'm going to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, good. Very good.
I think that within the Christian sense, we do have a God who challenges us to be better and to be as Christ-like as possible, knowing that we can never achieve it fully. But then at the same time, he has this plan that even though we might question it, and even though we might not understand it, and even there's all these things that might seem negative, ultimately it is good, and ultimately it does have a purpose.
Oh yeah.
And ultimately it serves each and every one of us. As long as we do our part, the plan will do its part. If that kind of makes sense. Simply put, that's my kind of idea behind it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts behind that?
No. I see that balance very much. And it's as we recognize his purpose and plan. Jesus taught his disciples to pray every day, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We're to pray that every day. I want God's will to be done in me, through me. I want God's kingdom to rule in me and through me. Okay, well, that's challenging. That pushes us. That will motivate us. But he also teaches us to pray every day. Forgive us our trespasses. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Knowing that we're going to struggle. We continue to be strugglers in need of strength. His ultimate purpose and goal is that conformity to the image of Christ. But it's going to be an ongoing process. It's going to have ups and downs, probably more downs than ups in this earthly life. But he's always there as that, in a sense, as that heavenly grandfather, always there to encourage us, always there to support us, to restore us, to lift us back up, but also as a father to continue to challenge us and push us. But he pushes us with his grace. He pushes us with his spirit. That is the enablement that's there. We say, okay, Lord, I know I need to be more patient. And so he gives us difficult situations that cultivate that patience. I know I need to have more courage in my faith. So he gives us the challenges, the fears that can be overcome by the courage that he imparts.
I mean, I forgot what movie it is, but there's a movie where Morgan Freeman is talking to this woman, and he says, if you ask God for patience, does he give you patience, or does he give you opportunities to be patient?
There it is.
And then he goes on and lists several other examples after that.
Yeah.
But the whole point being is like, it's stuff like that where, you know, if you want to be something, he's going to give you opportunities to demonstrate that within yourself. He's not just going to say, oh, you want to be patient? Here's patience.
Yeah, it's not like he pours in a quality of character and all of a sudden we start exhibiting it. He challenges us with the life experiences that cultivate that character.
Right.
Yeah.
Within, I think it was week 4 of our class, we spoke about what is your opinion on the difference between being and becoming.
Oh, excellent.
And that you asked fascinating questions at the end of every class, and that was the one that caught my attention the most. Just I'm not really sure why, but I'm really interested in your personal opinion between the difference.
Yeah, well, it's another one of those where it's a both and.
Right.
You know, there is the sense of being in that the design, the intention, the purpose, and God's work through what Christ has accomplished for us brings us to a new state of being, a renewed state of being, a newness of life. So it's a new state of being, but he doesn't leave us, you know, in this sort of in a sense floating around. No, we have to get our feet on the ground and engage in this ongoing process of becoming. That's the struggle. That's the you know, it's like climbing up the mountain. You might be a mountain trekker. You know, you might have all the equipment. You know, you have everything you need to engage that trek, but you just have to start the path. You have to pursue the path. So it's the notion that God grants us everything we need because we have this newness of life in Christ. That's the new sense of being, and I believe that. I have to accept that, and I believe that. But it's because I am that now I can do, I can become, and the becoming is a process, and go back to it's an up and down. You know, it may be there may be a pinnacle that I'm seeking to reach, but I'm going to slide down that path. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to fall. I'm going to need to be restored. I'm going to break a leg, and my leg's going to need to heal. And I'm going to need others along the way. I can't make that journey on my own. So
just so I can kind of make sure I understand. So the being is kind of what we have within us, so that we have the capabilities to become what we are ultimately trying to do.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The being is God's ultimate and all consuming gift to us. This newness of life. Being. I exist in that. I exist in this newness of life because of what Christ has accomplished for me. But then he challenges me to live that out. I'm going to be preaching at one of the Korean churches this coming Sunday, and one of the passages I will cover is a passage that Paul wrote in one of his letters, where he says, "Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, knowing that it is God who is at work within you, both to will and to do his good pleasure. So it's the sense of, he sort of puts the becoming before the being.
Right.
He says, now be, exist in this experience of becoming, but you can exist in becoming. You can go through this process because of what God has done and is doing. So it's a both and.
That's a fascinating take. What I'd put down here is just kind of what I described when I was thinking about it when you'd originally asked the question.
Sure.
Was being was who our past actions describe us to be. So like our being is just you. I mean, refer it to Victor A. Copeland speaking about neuroplasticity.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I had spoken about in there. And neuroplasticity kind of being like the process of our brain changing over time.
Right.
Being is just like from what I had put down here was like just everything that our past has made us so
up
far.
To this point.
So it's kind of similar to what you were saying. It's
okay.
Like, it's a combination of everything we had done so far, and now it's like, okay, this is the skill set, it's the knowledge, it's everything we have now. And then the becoming was what we desire to be, and then actually putting in the work to be closer to becoming.
Yes.
And I think an important part of that is also not necessarily being so harsh as saying something that you are actioning every single day. So like if I was to, like, I call myself a Christian, but I'm not at the point yet where I'm comfortable praying every single day because I just made that commitment a couple weeks ago. And it's something where like I'm not going to fake that entire process and fake it if I don't quite understand or even really necessarily know what to even pray about every day, then I'm not going to fake that process. So it's like not being so harsh to the fact that I understand that I want to get to the point of where I have something to pray about every day and I can have that relationship with God. And I can, but I'm not going to fake it at the same time. So I think becoming is understanding, one, who you want to be, but also two, understanding where you are in that process. And to the best of your knowledge, living at the right part of that process, if that makes sense.
No, that's good. That's good. That's a very important perspective. I agree. Yeah, very much so.
Anything else you want to add there? I got something from Dallas Willard that I want to follow up.
Oh, good. Next. Yeah, let's go to Willard. Yeah.
I mean, he also said, it's kind of the same thing as what C.S. Lewis, when he said spiritual formation is not an option but a choice. Dallas Willard essentially said that everyone is being spiritually formed, but how? It's kind of almost the same thing. But it wasn't, he made it sound less of like our choices. It was more of, it sounds almost more like it sounds more inclusive than it's more than just ourselves. He makes it sound like when he says when he says how, it sounds more like, okay, well, who are you around? What are you hearing? What messages are you receiving? It sounds like more inclusive of the external as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he does mean that, but I also think the choices come in that he says, how do you respond to those things that are surrounding you? To what are those experiences in your life right now? How am I responding to those? How am I reacting to those?
Sorry, just going to check the time really quickly.
Are we good?
I think so. I just don't want to be late to practices.
It's 11:12.
Yeah, we're good.
We're
good. We can just, I don't have a huge amount left anyway, so we can kind of finish this up and then, we'll be fine.
Sure.
Good. But sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Not at all. But Willard, I think, is still contemplating the element of choice, but I think it's more in the sense of responses, reaction, how I choose to respond to the life experiences that I encounter. Because a great deal of my life is not initiated necessarily by my choices, but rather are my choices in response to others' actions toward me or that influence me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also have to. It's like, to what extent can we take responsibility for the external sources that we are around?
Right.
Um, So that's an interesting part of it to consider as well. But I don't really know the answer to that, I guess. Um, and then I guess, kind of finishing up, I was just kind of curious about what kind of person are you currently working on becoming at this point in your life?
Yeah. One thing that I constantly see I have a greater need for growing into is growing into a person that is more attentive and more listening to others, seeking to understand others in a more complete way, um, taking the time. I have a tendency to sort of, there's certain things I want to do or accomplish, and I have this personality trait of, maybe scheduling my life too tightly and not allowing myself more flexibility to be attentive to others, to take the time to be more wholly present with another person, to listen and to seek to understand before I start offering what I think, that other person may quote unquote need. That oftentimes I may be saying things that are just totally irrelevant because I haven't taken the time to be more of an attentive listener. So there's a passage in the New Testament that talks about being quick to hear, slow to speak. My problem is my whole life I have been one who has been preoccupied with words, whether that's being a lawyer or ministering as a preacher in the church or teaching in the classroom. My engagement with others oftentimes is what I am saying to someone else, when I realize that I can only say meaningful things if I've taken the time to thoughtfully and carefully and reflectively listen and understand.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because I think it was our coach. I think it was the men's basketball coach here that said, I think he told me, you don't learn anything new when you're speaking.
That's a great.
And it's me personally. I'm always focused on what I'm learning. That's what this whole thing is about here.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah. I mean, what am I talking about if I'm speaking? I aim to kind of, and like I said, I'm young and I still am trying to figure out a whole lot of this, but I like to kind of only try and be talking when I'm trying to provide context behind the question that I'm asking.
Oh, yes.
So it's like, if I'm talking
Yeah.
I can then better allow you to answer a question or a thought that I have, then I kind of, and it works specifically in the podcast, especially.
Sure.
But even just generally in life, it's something that has helped me a lot. But like I said, I'm still working on it a lot. Just naturally being an introvert and naturally being someone that doesn't really necessarily care about the whole social interactions. This is something that's doing to challenge me a bit. So,
right.
Yeah, I like that part of it as well. But yeah, that's a great challenge, though. It is a great challenge, and you are a good listener. I will say that, because even in the classes, you would hear our ideas and then challenge our ideas as well. So I wouldn't say it's not a huge flaw of yours, I don't think. But
well, I still need to grow.
Right, of course.
Still need to grow.
Of course. Last thing before we wrap it up is your thoughts on the difference between morality and spirituality, it being the two main focuses of your class that you teach now.
Right. So spirituality, I think, is that whole arena of our awareness of the reality that is beyond the material existence. Our awareness of that and our interaction, our growth, our experience of that And for me, from my life experiences and my perspective, that means my awareness of the reality of Christ, that Jesus is a living being, present with us always, and wants us to come into a deeper and closer relationship with Him, and the all of the every dimension of that in terms of our existence. Prayer, as you mentioned before, is like breathing for the spiritual in the spiritual dimension. Hearing His word and understanding His word and sharing that word is sort of like eating in the spiritual dimension. So growth in the spiritual dimension involves those elements, those exercises that we talked about, spiritual exercises. Morality is more singularly focused on, am I on that path that God has called me to? And I don't actually reduce morality to necessarily questions of right and wrong. I think it goes back to what I mentioned before, this notion of understanding the will of God. What is God calling me to do? What is His will that I am to be pursuing, that I'm to be yielding myself to today? And that's an arena of ethics and morality that a lot of people would suggest is too nebulous.
I don't know what that means.
Unable to get any sort of handle on.
Right.
You know,
right.
you just, what is the will of God? You know.
Right.
But I believe that it's the best way to understand the will of God is to see and experience how Christ lived in this world in a very real challenge to us to follow Him, to follow His path. So that's a very specific element. It's within the broad. Spirituality is sort of like the broad, all-encompassing fullness of our existence. It really takes into every aspect of our being, not simply our spiritual, immaterial, but every part of our being, physical, emotional, psychological, and then morality is that particular path that He has for me today in serving Him, serving His purpose, honoring Him, and serving others day by day. So I need to be alert and learn and trust Him to guide and direct. He says He'll guide us, that He'll lead us along that path, and I trust Him to do that.
I think that's beautifully put, and I have no challenge behind that. I think that's great. I'm going to wrap this up if you have nothing else to add to that. And then
thanks very much. No, I love the conversation. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that was great. I really did enjoy that. I was really looking forward to it coming into it, and now I'm really glad we actually got to do it. That was a really great one. Good. Thank you. But
thank you.
But for our listeners, remember, your growth is limited when you're alone. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter, and now even TikTok. On Instagram or Twitter, feel free to reach out at _growth_net. And on TikTok, you can follow us at the Growth Network podcast, where I'll be posting shorts and little clippets from this podcast and several other podcasts that we record from here on out. And until next time, grow together.